Russia, apocalypse plane in the air. After a CIA mission, a spy has been captured. Right now, somewhere over Russian airspace, a plane built for the end of the world is circling, and nobody in Moscow will explain why. Hours earlier, America's top intelligence officer walked into the Kremlin unannounced. No cameras, no statement, just silence. And then this aircraft took off. At the very same time, a spy working against NATO was pulled off the streets. Coincidence? Or is this the moment everything changes? Stay with us until the end, because what happens next could decide the next move in this war. Welcome back, everyone, to the Siege War. Now, before we get into everything happening in this story, I want to ask you for a small favor. If you're the kind of person who likes to stay ahead of the news instead of hearing about it a day late, the subscribe button is right there, right below this video, and it costs you absolutely nothing. Think of it like keeping a reliable neighbor's number saved on your phone. You don't call every day, but when something big happens, you're glad you have it. That's what hitting subscribe does for you here. So go ahead, tap it now, so you never miss an update on this. And one more thing, I always like to know who's watching, so drop a comment down below and tell me, where are you watching from today? Now, let's get into it. It started with a plane, a quiet one, no press conference, no announcement, just a United States government aircraft landing at a Moscow airport. On board was one of America's top intelligence officials. He was not there for a photo opportunity. He was not there to shake hands for the cameras. He was there for something far more serious. Analysts say a visit like this does not happen often. The last time something similar took place was back in 2021. At that time, American officials traveled to Moscow to deliver a direct warning. They told the Russian leadership they were aware of plans to invade Ukraine. They warned that the consequences would be severe. Russia did not listen. Weeks later, the invasion began. Now, years later, a similar scene is playing out again. And that history matters, because it tells the audience something important. Visits like this are not routine diplomacy. They are reserved for moments of extreme seriousness. They happen when the information being shared is too sensitive, too urgent, or too dangerous to send through normal channels. So when a senior American intelligence officer suddenly appears inside Russia without warning, it raises one major question. What did he know that could not wait? The Kremlin, for its part, has not given a clear answer. Officials in Moscow confirmed only that some form of contact took place between security services. They gave no details about the subject. They gave no details about the purpose. And they claimed the Russian leadership was not directly involved or informed. For many analysts, that explanation does not add up. A foreign government aircraft carrying a top intelligence official does not simply land in the heart of Russia without high-level knowledge. Airspace clearance alone would require approval from the very top. So the idea that Russian leadership knew nothing appears, at best, incomplete. At worst, it is a deliberate attempt to downplay the seriousness of what actually happened. This pattern is familiar. Governments involved in escalating tensions often choose silence over explanation. Silence gives them room to maneuver. It avoids public panic. It avoids committing to a version of events that could later be proven wrong. But silence also fuels speculation. And in this case, the speculation is significant. Some believe the visit was meant to deliver a direct warning, similar to 2021, a warning about escalating military plans. A warning about the direction the conflict with Ukraine and NATO countries is heading. Others believe it may have involved a specific piece of intelligence, something urgent enough to require a face-to-face conversation rather than a written message or diplomatic cable. Either way, the timing cannot be ignored. This visit took place during a period of rising tension between Russia and Western nations. Troop movements have been reported. Military hardware has been repositioned. Communication intercepts have raised concern among NATO members. Against that backdrop, an unannounced visit from a top American intelligence official does not look like routine business. It looks like a moment of urgency. The world will likely never know the exact words exchanged in that meeting. Diplomatic and intelligence conversations of this nature are rarely made public. But the fact that it happened at all is a signal in itself. It suggests that whatever is unfolding behind closed doors, on both sides, is serious enough to require direct, in-person communication at the highest levels. And that is where the story truly begins. Because within hours of that mysterious visit concluding, something else happened. Something visible. Something impossible to ignore. A highly advanced Russian aircraft, rarely seen in public view, suddenly took to the skies. And that single event would raise even more questions than the visit itself. The visit had barely ended. The American plane had barely left Russian airspace. And that is when something unusual happened. A Russian aircraft, rarely seen by the public, suddenly took off. This was not an ordinary flight. It belonged to one of Russia's most secretive branches, the ministry responsible for handling national emergencies. Behind that quiet name sits a fleet of aircraft built for the worst possible scenarios. Some of these planes are believed to serve a purpose similar to what other major powers call a Doomsday aircraft, a flying command post, a plane designed to keep leadership connected and in control, even if every other communication system on the ground were to fail. It is not the kind of aircraft that takes off for routine training. It is not the kind of aircraft that flies for a scheduled maintenance check. So when it entered the sky within hours of the American visit ending, people who track this kind of activity took notice immediately. Flight tracking data showed the aircraft moving in a holding pattern, circling, staying in roughly the same region for an extended period. It moved toward the south of the country, edging closer to the Caspian Sea, closer to Iranian airspace, before continuing its loop back over Russian territory. For hours, it simply stayed in the air. No clear destination, no clear reason given. To understand why this matters, it helps to picture what these aircraft are built for. They are not meant for regular use. They exist for a small number of extreme situations, moments when leadership needs to remain protected and connected no matter what happens on the ground. Sending one into the sky is not a small decision. It requires approval from the highest levels of government. It requires coordination, planning, and a clear reason. And that is exactly why the timing raises so many questions. Two major events happened almost back to back. First, a top American intelligence official visited Moscow without any explanation given to the public. Second, shortly after that visit ended, one of Russia's most guarded aircraft entered the sky and stayed there for hours. Analysts studying patterns like this rarely believe in coincidence. When a government activates a piece of equipment reserved for extreme circumstances right after a secretive foreign visit, it usually means one of two things. Either the country is preparing for the possibility of a serious threat, or the country is sending a message, a visible signal meant to be noticed by observers, satellites, and rival intelligence agencies. Neither explanation is comforting. Russian officials have said nothing about the flight. No statement was released explaining its purpose. No comment was made about why the aircraft flew for as long as it did, or why its flight path stayed so close to sensitive regions. That silence is, in many ways, the loudest part of this story. Governments do not usually stay quiet about ordinary activity. They stay quiet when something did not go according to a public script, or when revealing the reason would raise more concern than the silence itself. For now, all that can be confirmed is this: a secret visit took place. A powerful, rarely seen aircraft entered the sky immediately after. And no one in Moscow has offered an explanation for either event. Whatever prompted this sequence, one thing seems increasingly clear. Behind the closed doors of this meeting, and inside the walls of Russian military planning rooms, something is shifting. And it appears to be shifting quickly. Because while that aircraft was still circling overhead, another development was unfolding on the ground, one involving a captured spy and a plot that had already been running for weeks. While the world was still trying to make sense of a mysterious aircraft circling Russian skies, another story was quietly reaching its conclusion. This one had started weeks earlier, far from any airport or military base. It began in a quiet forest on the outskirts of Berlin. A young man, only 24 years old, walked into the trees carrying 2 pistols. He was not acting alone. Investigators say he was following instructions from Russian intelligence handlers. His job was simple on the surface: hide the weapons, mark the location, wait for someone else to collect them. He had traveled a long way to do it, crossing from Poland into Germany by bus, carrying his hidden cargo the entire way. Once he reached the wooded area, he buried the weapons and used his phone to record the exact coordinates. Then he sent that information back to his handlers. Photos, location data, confirmation that the job was done. What he did not know was that his communication had already been intercepted. Polish intelligence services had picked up the signal, and from there, German security agencies were alerted. Investigators moved carefully. Instead of immediately seizing the weapons, they placed the hidden cache under quiet surveillance. They wanted to see who would come to collect it. Days passed, then weeks. No one arrived. Eventually, investigators moved in. They found 2 pistols hidden in the ground, including a handgun modeled after a well-known military design, along with ammunition. To prevent any future danger, specialists secretly disabled the weapons before returning them to their hiding place, continuing to watch and wait. But the person meant to retrieve them never came. The reason, investigators later discovered, was almost accidental. The very man who buried the weapons had already been arrested, not in Germany, but in Romania, in connection with an entirely separate case. It was only after piecing together his movements that authorities realized he was the same individual responsible for the Berlin weapons cache. This case did not happen in isolation. Security officials across Europe say it fits a growing pattern. Individuals, often young men from regions with ties to the ongoing conflict, being recruited quietly, paid small amounts, and used to carry out low-level tasks for Russian intelligence networks, moving weapons, scouting locations, passing along information. Most have no deep ideological commitment. Many are simply looking for money. But the tasks they carry out serve a much larger purpose, one connected directly to a broader campaign being run across European soil. This single case, a hidden cache of pistols in a German forest, may seem small when placed next to a Doomsday aircraft or a secretive government visit, but analysts warn that it should not be underestimated. These quiet operations are often the foundation for something larger. A stockpile here, a courier there, each piece appearing minor on its own, but together forming a wider network capable of acting quickly if a larger conflict were to erupt. And this was not the only sign of that wider pressure campaign. Just as this case was being finalized, warnings of a very different kind were reaching officials in the United Kingdom, warnings suggesting that direct military action could be closer than many had assumed. By this point, 3 separate pieces of the story had already unfolded. A secretive visit to Moscow, a rare aircraft circling the skies, a hidden weapons cache uncovered in a German forest. On their own, each event could almost be explained away, but together they form something much larger, a pattern that officials across Europe say cannot be ignored. That pattern became even clearer when new warnings reached leadership in the United Kingdom. Security officials reportedly told the British Prime Minister that Russia may be preparing for direct military action against the country, a warning due to Britain's continued support for Ukraine. This warning did not arrive on its own. It came almost immediately after the unexplained visit to Moscow, adding yet another layer to an already tense sequence of events. For months, security analysts had been tracking troop movements near Russia's western border. They had watched military buildups in heavily fortified regions. They had studied supply lines, equipment transfers, and communication patterns. Taken individually, none of these signs were alarming. Taken together, they painted a picture of a country preparing, not necessarily for peace, but for the possibility of a much larger confrontation. That is why Allied reconnaissance activity increased so sharply in recent days. Surveillance aircraft from neighboring countries were seen operating near sensitive border regions, gathering information, watching for unusual patterns, and trying to build a clearer picture of what was happening on the other side. At the same time, a very different kind of pressure was being applied, one that received far less public attention but carried serious consequences. Reports emerged of significant satellite navigation interference along a neighboring country's coastline. Communication systems that ships, aircraft, and everyday infrastructure rely on were being disrupted for hours at a time, with disruptions increasing sharply over just a few months. This kind of interference does not make headlines the way a military convoy does, but experts say it serves a similar purpose, testing how a country responds under pressure, probing weaknesses without crossing into open conflict. Meanwhile, another thread connected this entire story to a wider global network. Investigations revealed that critical technology, including advanced engine components, was making its way from Allied nations into weapon systems used on the battlefield. This technology transfer allowed certain weapons to fly faster and evade defense systems more effectively than before, shifting the balance in ongoing military operations. This detail matters because it shows the story is not limited to 2 countries. It stretches across several continents, involving multiple governments, supply chains, and alliances, each playing a role in a much larger unfolding contest. When every piece is placed side by side, a clear picture begins to form. A secretive diplomatic visit, a rare and powerful aircraft entering the sky without explanation, a quiet espionage network operating beneath the surface in Europe, direct warnings of possible military action against a NATO member, increased surveillance along sensitive borders, electronic interference designed to test and disrupt, international supply chains feeding advanced technology into the conflict. Individually, each of these might be dismissed as routine. Together, they suggest something far more serious, a period of rising pressure, careful positioning, and quiet preparation on multiple sides. Whether this leads to open conflict or simply another chapter of tension remains uncertain. But one thing is increasingly clear to those watching closely. The world is not simply witnessing isolated headlines. It is watching the slow, careful buildup of something much bigger, and the coming days may reveal exactly what that is.